Today's story is one of the most insane cases I have ever covered on this channel. A man went away for work for 8 months. When he came back, he discovered 4 fully constructed houses standing on his own land, families actually living inside. And when he asked what was going on, he was told the land no longer belonged to him. This is not a movie. This is a true story. And the way Thomas Gomez took everything back, every single square foot, using the exact legal system that the HOA thought they controlled, that is the part worth staying for. If you are new to Fallout HOA, drop a comment below and let me know where you are watching from.
The GPS said I had arrived, but nothing in front of me looked familiar. I had driven this road hundreds of times throughout my life. I knew every pothole, every curve, every patch of wildflowers that bloomed along the fence line in spring. But as I slowed my truck to a stop that afternoon in late September, I could not recognize a single thing. The red dirt road I had known since childhood was now fresh black asphalt. The wooden fence my grandfather built was gone. In its place stood a white concrete wall stretching as far as I could see in both directions. And right in front of me, where my grandfather's hand-carved gate used to hang, there was now an automatic iron entrance with bold letters that read, Willowbrook Estates Phase 2. The user wants me to continue writing the full Chapter 1 with all the revisions incorporated. Let me continue with the complete text. I sat in my truck for a full minute, engine still running, just staring. My brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. I had been gone for 8 months working on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. 8 months of 12-hour shifts, limited phone signal, and almost no contact with the outside world. But that is not 8 years. That is not enough time for your entire property to transform into something unrecognizable. Not enough time for someone to erase 60 years of your family's history and replace it with a gated community. I turned off the engine and stepped out of my truck. The first thing I heard was a lawnmower. Then, children are laughing somewhere in the distance. A dog barking, the sounds of a neighborhood, a living, breathing neighborhood that had somehow materialized on my 47 acres while I was away. I walked toward the gate, my boots crunching on gravel that should not have existed, and I looked through the iron bars at what lay beyond. 4 houses, ranch-style homes, each probably around 2,000 square feet, with attached garages and landscaped yards, cars and driveways, potted plants on porches, American flags hanging by front doors. These were not construction sites. These were homes where people had clearly been living for months. I pushed open the gate, which was unlocked, and walked inside. A man was washing his car in the driveway of the nearest house. He looked up when he saw me approaching, and his expression shifted from casual to suspicious in an instant. "Can I help you?" he called out, turning off his hose. "You looking for someone?" I stopped about 20 feet away from him. My throat felt tight. My hands were shaking slightly, though I could not tell if it was from anger or disbelief. "I am the owner of this land," I said. The words sounded absurd coming out of my mouth, like I was reciting a line from a bad dream. The man laughed, actually laughed. "You must be confused, buddy. I bought this house from the HOA 5 months ago. This is Willowbrook Phase 2. You probably have the wrong address." I looked around at the 4 houses, at the fresh sod lawns, at the newly paved street with its neat little sidewalks. 5 months. They had been living here for 5 months. While I was welding pipes and checking pressure gauges 100 miles offshore, someone had sold my land, built 4 houses on it, moved 4 families in, and created an entire fake reality where none of this belonged to me. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not rage, not yet. Something deeper than that. The feeling you get when someone has not just wronged you, but has completely erased your existence from a place where you belonged. The man with the hose was still watching me, his posture now defensive. "Look, if you have some kind of issue, you should talk to the HOA office. It is in Phase 1, about half a mile down the main road." He pointed vaguely behind me. "But I am telling you, everything here is legit. I saw the paperwork myself." I did not argue with him. I did not explain that I had a deed with my name on it dating back 15 years. I did not tell him that my grandfather had bought this land with money he saved, working double shifts at a meatpacking plant for 2 decades. I did not say any of that, because I have worked on oil rigs long enough to know that when something goes catastrophically wrong, you do not start yelling, you start documenting. I took out my phone and began taking pictures. The gate, the sign, the houses, the license plates of every car I could see, the man's face from a distance, just in case. He noticed and started walking toward me. "Hey, what are you doing? You cannot just take pictures of people's homes." I ignored him and kept shooting. The street layout, the utility poles, the mailboxes with their neat little numbers, every piece of evidence that proved this place existed, that it was real, that someone had built it and someone had paid for it and someone had profited from it, all on land that belonged to me. "I am calling the HOA, the man said, pulling out his own phone. "You need to leave." I lowered my camera and looked at him, really looked at him. He was maybe 40 years old, a wedding ring on his finger. The kid's bicycle is visible in his open garage. He was not my enemy. He was just a guy who thought he had bought a house for his family. He had no idea he was standing on stolen ground. "Call whoever you want," I said calmly. "I will be in touch." And then I walked back to my truck, got inside, and sat there for another 10 minutes, just breathing, just thinking, just letting the full weight of what had happened settle into my bones. Someone had stolen my land, not just trespassed on it, not just dumped trash on it. They had stolen it, developed it, sold it, and convinced 4 families that everything was legitimate. This was not a mistake. This was not a bureaucratic error. This was a plan, and whoever was behind it had been counting on me being too far away, too disconnected, too powerless to stop them. They were wrong. Let me pause here for a second. I want you to really put yourself in my position at that moment. You have just spent 8 months working brutal shifts to provide for your future. You come home expecting to see your grandfather's farm, the place where you learned to ride a bike, where you buried your first dog, where you spread your grandmother's ashes under the old oak tree. And instead, you find strangers living in brand new houses, telling you that you are the one who is confused. What would you do? Honestly, would you start screaming? Would you call 911? Would you put your fist through someone's windshield? I would not judge you for any of those reactions. But what I did next might not be what you expect. You might be thinking, why did he not just call the police immediately? The answer is, I did. Within an hour of leaving my property, I pulled into a gas station parking lot and dialed the sheriff's department. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, told them someone had built houses on my land without my permission, told them I had been away for work and came back to find an entire development where my farm used to be. The dispatcher sounded skeptical, but she said she would send a deputy out to meet me. Deputy Martinez arrived about 45 minutes later, early 30s, clean uniform, clipboard in hand. I showed him my deed. I showed him the photos I had taken. I explained the timeline, 8 months offshore, no contact, no sale, no transfer. He wrote something down, checked his watch, then made a phone call. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When he came back, he did not make eye contact. "Mr. Beter Gomez, according to county records, that land is listed under Willowbrook Estates HOA, part of a planned development approved earlier this year." His voice was flat, reading from a script. "That is impossible," I said. "I never sold anything. I never signed anything." He handed me back my deed like it was a receipt for groceries. "This is a civil matter. Property disputes, deed issues, that is for the courts. You will need an attorney." He was already walking back to his cruiser before I could respond. No follow-up questions, no concern, just a box checked and a problem filed under someone else's responsibility. I sat in my truck for a long time after he drove away. Then I headed to the address the man with the hose had given me, the HOA office in Phase 1. If the sheriff would not help, maybe I could get answers directly from the source. The office was a converted house at the entrance of the original Willowbrook Estates subdivision, a modest 2-story with a sign out front that said Community Management Office and a little American flag sticker on the window. I parked and walked inside. The reception area was small, decorated with framed photos of smiling families at community barbecues and holiday events. A woman at the front desk looked up and asked if I had an appointment. I told her I needed to speak with whoever was in charge. She made a quick call, And a few minutes later, a man emerged from a back office, late 50s, average height, polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced. "Mr. Gomez, is it I am Jack Howard, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Please, come into my office. I understand there has been some confusion." Confusion, that was the word he used. Like I had misread a street sign or forgotten where I parked. I followed him into his office and sat down across from his desk. The walls were covered with certificates and plaques. Community Leader of the Year. Excellence in Neighborhood Development. Photos of Jack shaking hands with local politicians. This man had built himself a little kingdom, and every square inch of this room was designed to remind you of it. "Mr. Gomez, I want to start by saying we tried to reach you," Jack began, folding his hands on his desk. "Multiple times, letters, phone calls, even a certified notice. Unfortunately, none of our attempts were successful." I said nothing, just watched him. He continued. "As you may know, the county approved an expanded development zone earlier this year. Your property fell within the boundaries of that zone. And because it appeared to be abandoned, with no active management or response to our communications, the HOA was granted authority to incorporate it into Phase 2. Granted authority by whom?" Jack smiled. The kind of smile people use when they think they are explaining something to a child. "By the County Planning Commission. It is all perfectly legal. Mr. Gomez, I assure you." He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder, sliding it across the desk. "You are welcome to review everything, but I think you will find that the matter has been settled. The land has been developed, the homes have been sold, and the families are established." He paused, leaning back in his chair, fingers laced behind his head. "However, I understand this is difficult. The HOA is prepared to offer you modest compensation for any inconvenience. A goodwill gesture." I picked up the folder but did not open it. I looked at Jack Howard, on his certificates, in his comfortable leather chair, at the way. He had not shifted his posture once since I sat down. This man had stolen my land, sold it, and pocketed the money, and now he was offering me a goodwill gesture like he was doing me a favor. I stood up, tucked the folder under my arm, and walked toward the door. Mr. Gomez," Jack called after me, his voice still pleasant, "I really do recommend you accept our offer. Fighting this would be expensive and time-consuming, and frankly, the outcome is already determined." I stopped at the doorway. He was still leaning back, one ankle crossed over his knee now, fingers drumming lightly on the armrest, not a trace of tension anywhere in his body. He had done this before, pushed people around, waited for them to fold, collected his winnings, and it had always worked. I did not say anything. I just looked at him long enough for his smile to flicker, just slightly, at the edges. Then I walked out. He thought I was going to disappear, take his little payout and vanish like every other problem he had buried under paperwork and procedure. He was wrong. That night, I checked into a motel about 20 minutes outside of town. I sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop open, staring at a search engine, and typed, "Someone built on my land in Texas," into the search bar. Millions of results, articles about property disputes, legal forums, and news stories about squatters. None of it seemed to apply. I spent the first 2 hours going in circles, clicking links that led nowhere, and reading legal jargon that made my head spin. Then I stopped, closed all the tabs, started over. If I were going to fight this, I needed to approach it the same way I approached any complex problem at work. Break it down into pieces, find the source documents, follow the chain of evidence. The first question was simple. Did I still legally own the land? I went to the county clerk's website and searched for my property records. It took some digging, but I found the deed. My name was still on it, Thomas Gomez, recorded 15 years ago when my grandfather passed and left the land to me. There was no transfer, no amendment, no indication that ownership had ever changed hands. According to the official county records, I was still the sole legal owner of those 47 acres, which meant that everything Jack Howard had told me about the county granting authority to the HOA was false. Not a misunderstanding, a statement made with full knowledge that the paperwork would show otherwise. Here is what matters about Texas property law. A deed is the highest proof of land ownership. and something called adverse possession requires 10 continuous years of occupation before anyone can claim someone else's land. These houses had existed for 6 months. The HOA had no legal claim, none. They had simply taken what was not theirs. The next thing I searched for was building permits. In Texas, any construction requires a permit listing the property owner, contractor, and approving official. I found the permits for all 4 houses in Phase 2, issued 7 months ago, right around the time I left for the rig. The listed property owner on each permit was Willowbrook Estates HOA, not me, not my grandfather's name, just the HOA, as if they had every right to build whatever they wanted on land they did not own. And at the bottom of each permit, there was a signature. Councilman Rick Davenport, member of the City Council, the man responsible for approving construction projects in the area, a councilman who had signed off on 4 permits without performing the most basic ownership verification that any title search would have revealed in minutes. I kept digging. The sales records for the 4 homes showed that each one had sold for between $180,000 and $220,000. 4 houses, close to $800,000 in total. That money had to go somewhere. I searched for Willowbrook Estates financial filings and found a reference to something called the Willowbrook Estates Development Fund. The account had been opened 14 months ago, 3 months before any construction began. The treasurer listed on the account was Brenda Howard, Jack Howard's wife. The fund had been created before the first shovel hit the ground, before the permits were filed, before anyone had supposedly tried to contact me about my abandoned property. I know this part might feel dense. Permits, deeds, county records, and financial filings. It is not as dramatic as watching a man tell you that your land is no longer yours. But this is where the real story begins. The HOA did not own the land. A city councilman signed permits without verifying ownership. The money from the home sales went into a fund controlled by the HOA president's wife, a fund that existed before the project even started. If you are paying attention, you can see what this is, and you understand why the people who did this are about to lose everything. Stay with me. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Her name was Denise Wood, a real estate attorney recommended by a coworker whose family had dealt with a land dispute years back. I gave her the short version: inherited land, went offshore, came back to find 4 houses and an HOA claiming ownership. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Gomez," she said finally, her voice careful and precise, "what you are describing is not a property dispute. This is fraud." I waited. She continued. "And based on what you are telling me about the permits and the fund, the timeline of when that account was opened, this could be a conspiracy, multiple people working together to commit a crime." I asked her what that meant for me. "It means we are not just going to get your land back," she said. "If we do this right, the people who did this are going to face serious consequences, criminal consequences. But I need you to understand something. Mr. Gomez, people who plan something like this usually have backup stories. They have paperwork that looks legitimate on the surface. They have friends in the right places. Beating them means being more thorough than they were. It means documenting everything and letting them make mistakes." I told her I understood. I told her about the folder Jack Howard had given me, the one I had not opened yet. "Do not open it alone," she said. "Bring it to my office tomorrow. We will go through everything together. And Mr. Gomez, do not talk to Jack Howard again. Do not talk to anyone from the HOA. From now on, everything goes through me." I hung up the phone and looked at the folder sitting on the motel desk. Jack Howard had handed it to me with such confidence, such certainty that I would see his paperwork and give up. He had no idea that every document inside was potentially evidence, every signature, every date, every carefully constructed lie waiting to be dismantled. Denise Wood had used 2 words that kept echoing in my head: fraud, conspiracy. These were not civil disputes settled with handshakes and compromise. These were crimes. And the people who committed them were about to discover that the system they thought they controlled had rules they could not bend. I did not sleep much that night, but for the first time since I had driven up to that iron gate and seen those 4 houses on my land, I felt something other than shock and anger. I felt clarity. I knew what I was dealing with now. I knew who was involved, and I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The next afternoon, I drove out to visit some of the old-timers who still lived in the area surrounding my property. People who had been there long before Willowbrook Estates existed, long before Jack Howard decided he could redraw the map to suit his ambitions. Most of them had heard rumors about what happened. A few had seen the construction trucks rolling in months ago, but assumed it was legitimate development. One name kept coming up in conversation. Hector Medina, Old Man Hector. They called him, 78 years old, lived on a small plot about a quarter-mile from my grandfather's land. He had been in this area since 1962. If anyone knew what had really happened while I was away, it would be him. I found Hector sitting on his front porch, a glass of iced tea sweating in the afternoon heat. When I introduced myself and explained who I was, his expression shifted from polite curiosity to something sharper. "Thomas Gomez," he repeated slowly. "The one who works on the oil rigs." I nodded. He set down his glass. "I wondered when you would show up. Come inside. There is something you need to see." His living room was small and cluttered with decades of accumulated life. But in the corner, mounted on the wall, was a monitor connected to a security camera system. 4 cameras covered different angles of his property and the road beyond. "I installed these after some kids started causing trouble a few years back," Hector explained. "They run 24 hours a day, and they record everything." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a USB drive, holding it up between 2 fingers. 6 months of footage, starting from the day they broke ground on your land. I stared at the drive. 6 months. Everything that had happened while I was on that rig, captured on camera. "I saw the trucks come in," Hector continued. "The surveyors, the construction crews. I called Jack Howard and asked what was going on. He said it was a community project approved by the county, all legitimate." Hector's jaw tightened. I did not know what to do, so I kept recording. Figured someone would come asking eventually. He pressed the USB drive into my hand. "Now someone has..." I thanked Hector and drove straight to Denise Wood's office. She spent 3 hours reviewing the footage, fast-forwarding through weeks of construction activity, pausing to note dates and faces, and license plates. By the time she finished, her expression was grim but focused. "This is gold," she said. "Time-stamped video evidence of the entire construction process. We can match this against the permit dates, the fund transactions, everything." They thought no one was watching. But Jack Howard was not sitting idle. Within days of my visit to his office, word had spread through Willowbrook Estates that someone was causing problems. Denise forwarded me a screenshot of an email sent to every homeowner in both Phase 1 and Phase 2. The subject line read, "Urgent Community Alert." The message was from Jack Howard himself. It described an individual, unnamed but clearly referring to me, who was attempting to disrupt the community with false claims of land ownership. It warned residents not to engage with this person, not to provide any information, and to report any contact to the HOA office immediately. The email called me a potential scammer targeting hardworking families. It urged everyone to stand together against this threat to their homes. You have seen this playbook before. When facts fail, fear works. Turn the victim into the villain. Rally the crowd so no one stops to ask whether the accusations are true. Jack Howard was betting that community pressure would make me disappear. He was wrong. The question was simple. Show up at his community meeting and risk being recorded as the aggressor, or stay silent. Let him think he was winning, and prepare something he would never see coming. I chose silence, and I waited. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived at the motel where I was staying. Somehow, Jack Howard had found out my location. The envelope contained a formal cease and desist notice from an attorney representing Willowbrook Estates, HOA. The letter accused me of defamation, harassment, and intentional interference with business relations. It demanded that I immediately stop all contact with community members, cease making false claims about property ownership, and refrain from any actions that could damage the reputation of the HOA. If I failed to comply, the letter warned, the HOA would pursue all available legal remedies. They were threatening to sue me for trying to reclaim my own land. I brought the letter to Denise. She read it twice, then looked up at me with something close to a smile. "They sent a cease to the legal owner of the property they stole." She set the letter down. "This is panic. Mr. Gomez, they know you are not going away. And instead of backing down, they are doubling down. Every move they make now is another piece of evidence, another document with their signatures, another proof they knew exactly what they were doing. She slid the letter into a folder marked with my case number. Let them keep sending these. Let them keep making threats. Every letter is a gift. I walked out of her office that evening and sat in my truck for a long time, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Jack Howard had mobilized an entire community against me. He had painted me as a con artist, a threat, a predator targeting innocent families. He had lawyers sending cease and desist letters to intimidate me into silence. He was pulling every lever he had, using every tool in his arsenal, absolutely certain that the pressure would eventually break me. He thought he was tightening the noose around my neck. He had no idea he was tying it around his own. A week after the cease and desist letter arrived, Denise and I sat in her office reviewing our core evidence. The deed with my name on it, never transferred. The sales contracts were signed by Jack Howard. The $800,000 sitting in Brenda Howard's development fund. It was more than enough to file a lawsuit. But Denise had a different approach in mind. We could go to court right now, she said, file a quiet title action, prove ownership, and let the judge sort it out. But I want to ask you something first. What do you actually want out of this? I thought about it. I want my land back. I want the people who did this to face real consequences. I paused. But those 4 families living in those houses, they did not know. They thought they were buying legitimate homes. I do not want them destroyed because Jack Howard lied to them. Denise nodded slowly. Then we need to do this carefully. If we just file suit, Jack can claim he was misled by county records, that the permits were someone else's responsibility, and that he acted in good faith. He will throw Davenport under the bus, maybe even his own wife, and position himself as another victim. We need him to admit, on record, that he was the one who orchestrated the sales. Denise drafted a formal request for mediation, a neutral meeting where both parties could discuss the dispute and potentially reach a settlement without going to court. She framed it as an opportunity for the HOA to resolve the matter quietly, without the expense and publicity of litigation. Jack Howard accepted within 48 hours. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning at a neutral office downtown. Present in the room were I, Denise, Jack Howard, his attorney, a professional mediator, and, most importantly, a court reporter. Everything said in that room would be transcribed. Jack walked in looking relaxed. He shook hands with the mediator, made small talk about the weather, and settled into his chair like a man attending a routine business meeting. His attorney, a nervous-looking younger guy, shuffled papers and avoided eye contact. Denise let them talk first. Jack's attorney laid out their position. The land had been incorporated into the HOA's development zone through proper county procedures. The sales were conducted in good faith. The homeowners were innocent purchasers. If Mr. Gomez had a grievance, it was with the county, not with Willowbrook Estates. When they finished, Denise thanked them and began asking questions. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. Mr. Howard, did the HOA sign contracts for the sale of the 4 homes in Phase 2? Jack nodded. Yes. His attorney shifted, but said nothing. Who signed those contracts on behalf of the HOA? Denise continued. I did. President, signing authority for all official transactions. Denise made a note. And the proceeds from those sales. Approximately $800,000. Where did that money go? Jack's jaw tightened slightly. Willowbrook Estates Development Fund. All documented. Denise nodded. Who manages that fund? My wife, Brenda. She is the treasurer. He said it flatly, like there was nothing unusual about collecting $800,000 into an account controlled by his spouse for property sales he personally authorized. Denise let the silence hold for 3 seconds. Then she reached into her folder and pulled out a single document. She slid it across the table toward Jack. Mr. Howard, do you recognize this? Jack picked it up, glanced at it, and his face went pale. It was my deed, the original deed showing Thomas Gomez as the sole legal owner of 47 acres, recorded 15 years ago, with no transfers, no amendments, no changes. This is the deed to the property where those 4 homes now stand, Denise said. The property that the HOA never owned. The property that you just confirmed, on the record, that you sold. You signed land contracts that did not belong to you. You collected $800,000 for property you had no right to sell. Jack's attorney grabbed his arm. We need to take a break. My client needs to, but Jack was already standing, face red, composure gone. This is entrapment, he shouted. This whole thing is a setup. I am going to sue all of you. The mediator raised a hand. Mr. Howard, I strongly advise you to calm down. Jack was past listening. He jabbed a finger at me. You think you can come back after abandoning that land and just take everything I built that community? I created value where there was nothing but weeds and dirt. You are nothing. His attorney managed to pull him toward the door. We are leaving. This mediation is over. They were gone within 30 seconds. Denise turned to the court reporter. Please make sure the transcript is certified and filed with the court by the end of business today. Then she looked at me. He confirmed he signed the contracts. He confirmed he collected the money. He confirmed his wife controlled the fund. And when confronted with the deed, he did not deny anything. He exploded. She closed her folder. Mr. Gomez, Jack Howard just locked every door he could have used to escape. That transcript is now part of the official record. Jack Howard walked in thinking he would negotiate a payout. He walked out having confessed to selling property he never owned. In front of witnesses, on the record, there is no walking that back. 2 days after the mediation, Denise filed 3 separate actions. The first was a quiet title lawsuit in county court, formally requesting a judicial determination that I, Thomas Gomez, was the sole legal owner of the 47 acres in question. The second was a criminal complaint submitted to the district attorney's office, alleging fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and forgery against Jack Howard, Brenda Howard, and any other parties to be identified during the investigation. The third was a formal complaint to the Texas State Bar against the attorney who had drafted and sent the cease and desist letter on behalf of the HOA for knowingly participating in a scheme to deprive a lawful property owner of his rights. 3 filings, 3 different branches of the system. All were activated within 72 hours of Jack Howard's meltdown in that mediation room. Denise called me that Friday afternoon. Her voice had a different quality than before, energized. The district attorney's office just contacted me, she said. They are opening a formal investigation. And Thomas, they are very interested in the permit angle, the councilman who signed off on those building permits without verifying ownership. They want to know more about Rick Davenport. I told her I did not know much about Davenport beyond his name on the permits. Neither did I, she replied. So, I did some digging, and I found something that changes everything. What Denise had uncovered was buried in public corporate filings, the kind of documents most people never bother to look at. Councilman Rick Davenport owned 15% of a company called Hill Country Construction LLC. That company had been awarded the contract to build all 4 houses in Phase 2 of Willowbrook Estates. The same houses were built on my land, the same permits that Davenport himself had signed and approved. A city councilman had authorized construction on property he did not verify, for a project that directly enriched a company he partially owned. This was not just negligence. This was not just a conflict of interest. This was public corruption. Let me stop here for a moment, because this is important. Up until now, this story was about an HOA president who got greedy and thought he could steal land from someone who was not around to stop him. That is bad enough. But when you add a public official using his government position to approve fraudulent permits for his own financial benefit, you are in a completely different territory. That is not a civil dispute anymore. That is a federal matter, and federal matters attract federal attention. Denise forwarded her findings to the district attorney, who immediately escalated the case. Within a week, the FBI's Public Corruption Unit had been notified. 2 agents came to Denise's office to review the evidence. They spent 4 hours going through the permits, the corporate filings, the fund transactions, and the mediation transcript. They asked questions I had not even thought of. Who introduced Jack Howard to Rick Davenport? How long had they known each other? Were there other development projects they had worked on together? By the time they left, I understood that this investigation had grown far beyond my stolen land. I was now a witness in a potential federal corruption case. The dominoes started falling fast. Councilman Davenport was suspended from his position on the city council pending the outcome of the investigation. His name disappeared from the counsel's website within 24 hours. Jack Howard received a subpoena requiring him to produce all financial records related to Willowbrook Estates Development Fund, all communications with Rick Davenport, and all documents related to the sale of homes in Phase 2. Brenda Howard received a separate subpoena demanding a full accounting of every transaction processed through the development fund since its creation. The HOA's attorney, the one who had sent me the cease and desist letter, was notified that he was under investigation by the state bar for professional misconduct. Here is something most people do not realize about investigations like this. Once multiple agencies are involved, the people at the center start turning on each other. Everyone wants to be the one who cooperates first, because cooperation means a lighter sentence. It is a race to the bottom, and the slowest runner gets crushed. Denise told me to expect things to move quickly now. She was right. Within 2 weeks of the subpoenas being issued, Brenda Howard's attorney contacted the district attorney's office requesting a meeting. Brenda wanted to talk. She wanted to explain her role in the fund. She wanted to make clear that she had only followed her husband's instructions, that she did not know the land did not belong to the HOA, and that she was a victim of Jack's manipulation, just like everyone else. Whether any of that was true remained to be seen. But the fact that she was already trying to distance herself from Jack told me everything I needed to know. The united front was cracking. I drove out to Hector's place that weekend to update him on what was happening. He listened quietly, nodding occasionally, sipping his iced tea. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said something I will never forget. Your grandfather used to say that land does not lie. People lie, papers can lie, but the land remembers who took care of it and who tried to steal it. The land always knows. He looked out at the horizon, toward where my property sat just out of view. Jack Howard thought he could bury the truth under concrete and fresh paint, but the truth does not stay buried. It never does. I thanked Hector and drove back toward town. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the Texas landscape. Somewhere in that direction, Jack Howard was probably sitting in his HOA office, watching everything he had built start to crumble. His wife was cutting deals. His councilman friend was suspended. Federal agents were combing through his records, and the land he had stolen was still there, waiting for its rightful owner to reclaim it. The system he had manipulated for years was now turning its full weight against him, and we were just getting started. The quiet title hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early December, almost 3 months after I had first driven up to that iron gate and seen 4 houses standing on my grandfather's land. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, an American flag behind the judge's bench. Nothing dramatic, just a room where the truth would finally be put on the official record. Denise sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, our evidence organized in neat folders. Across the aisle, Jack Howard sat with a new attorney, a gray-haired man in an expensive suit brought in to replace the nervous younger lawyer from the mediation. Jack stared straight ahead, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Hernandez, reviewed the case file before addressing the courtroom. "Counsel for the plaintiff," she said, looking at Denise. "Please present your argument." Denise stood and walked to the podium. She spoke for less than 15 minutes. She did not need drama. She presented the deed showing unbroken ownership in my name for 15 years. Then she played the key portions of the mediation transcript where Jack Howard confirmed he had signed the sales contracts, collected the money, and deposited it into a fund controlled by his wife. She did not editorialize. She let Jack's own words do the work. When Denise finished, the judge turned to Jack's attorney. "Counsel for the defendant, your response." The gray-haired lawyer stood slowly. He spoke for about 10 minutes, but his argument had no foundation. He could not dispute the deed. He could not explain away the mediation transcript. All he could do was suggest that his client had acted in good faith based on representations from county officials. It was a weak argument, and everyone in the room knew it. Judge Hernandez listened without expression, occasionally making notes. When the attorney finished, she called for a 15-minute recess. Those 15 minutes felt longer than the 8 months I had spent on the oil rig. I sat in the hallway with Denise, neither of us speaking. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Hernandez did not waste time. "The court has reviewed all evidence submitted by both parties," she began. The deed to the property in question has been held by Thomas Gomez since it was transferred to him 15 years ago. There is no record of any sale, transfer, or legal conveyance of this property to Willowbrook Estates, HOA, or any other party. She paused. Furthermore, the defendant's own recorded statements at mediation confirm that he signed contracts to sell property he did not own and collected approximately $800,000 from those sales. The judge continued. The evidence is overwhelming. This court finds that Thomas Gomez is and has always been the sole legal owner of the 47 acres in question. All claims by Willowbrook Estates, HOA, to this property are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, this court is referring the evidence to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. The actions described in these proceedings constitute fraud, conspiracy, and potentially other offenses outside the jurisdiction of this civil proceeding. She gathered her papers. This hearing is adjourned. I heard Denise exhale beside me. Jack Howard sat motionless, staring at the table, a man who had finally run out of moves. I had my land back. The law had confirmed what I always knew, but there were still 4 families living in houses they believed they had purchased legally. They had paid between $180,000 and $220,000 each for homes built on stolen ground. They were victims too. I asked Denise to help me arrange a meeting with all 4 families. It took convincing. They had been told I was a scammer trying to steal their homes. But eventually, they agreed. We met at a community center in town, neutral territory. 8 adults sat across from me, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. I told them the truth, all of it, the deed, the fraud, the investigation. I told them I understood they had done nothing wrong, they had trusted the HOA, they had believed the paperwork was legitimate, and I told them I was not going to take their homes. I proposed a solution. I would sell them the lots their houses sat on at exactly the price they had paid Jack Howard. Fair market value, no markup. The restitution money from the criminal case would cover any difference. They would have clean titles, legal ownership, the right to stay in their homes without fear. One woman wiped her eyes. A man shook my hand firmly and thanked me. They had come expecting to lose everything. Instead, they found out the nightmare was over. The criminal case moved forward over the following months. Jack Howard was charged with fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud, facing potential sentences of 2 to 20 years, given the amount of money involved. Brenda Howard cooperated with prosecutors and received a reduced charge of conspiracy, resulting in 3 years probation and 200 hours of community service. She was permanently barred from holding any financial position in an HOA or community organization. Councilman Rick Davenport faced federal charges for public corruption related to his undisclosed ownership stake in the construction company. He eventually accepted a plea deal, 18 months in federal prison and a lifetime ban from holding public office. The HOA attorney who had sent the cease and desist letter had his license suspended pending a full state bar investigation. Willowbrook Estates HOA was placed under court supervision. A new board was elected. The development fund was dissolved, and all remaining assets were used to compensate the victims of the scheme. The 4 families received clear titles to their properties, and I received what had always been mine, 47 acres of Texas land that my grandfather had bought, with 20 years of double shifts at a meatpacking plant, land that Jack Howard thought he could steal while I was working offshore, land that the courts had now confirmed belonged to me and only me. I did not scream at Jack Howard. I did not threaten him or post videos trying to destroy him. I gathered evidence, hired a lawyer, and let the system work. The 4 families kept their homes. Jack Howard lost everything. That is not revenge. That is justice. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of my grandfather's farmhouse, watching the sun rise over 47 acres of Texas land. The house had been here since 1964, built by my grandfather with help from neighbors who understood that land was more than property. It was a legacy. It was identity. It was something worth protecting. The house needed work. The roof had some damage from a storm that passed through while I was offshore. The paint was peeling in places. The floorboards on the porch creaked in ways they had not creaked before, but it was still standing, and it was still mine. Jack Howard had tried to erase this place, to bury it under fresh asphalt and new construction and official-looking paperwork. He had failed. The house remained. The land remained. And now, Finally, so did I. The criminal trials concluded 2 months before I moved back. Jack Howard was convicted on 3 counts of fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud. The judge, noting the scale of the scheme, the number of victims, and Jack's complete lack of remorse throughout the proceedings, sentenced him to 5 years in state prison. He would be eligible for parole after serving 2 years, but only if he made full restitution to all parties affected by his crimes. Given that the total amount exceeded $800,000 and most of his assets had been seized, parole was unlikely to come quickly. Brenda Howard, who had cooperated with prosecutors and testified against her husband, received 3 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. She was also permanently prohibited from holding any financial position in a homeowners association or community organization. Their marriage did not survive the trial. I heard she moved to another state to live with a sister. I never saw her again. Councilman Rick Davenport's case was handled by federal prosecutors. The FBI's investigation had uncovered not just his involvement in the Willowbrook scheme, but a pattern of similar conflicts of interest stretching back nearly a decade. He had used his position on the city council to approve permits and contracts that benefited companies he secretly owned or invested in. The Willowbrook case was simply the one where he finally got caught. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of public corruption and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. More importantly, he was permanently banned from holding any public office for the rest of his life. His name was removed from a community center that had been dedicated to him 5 years earlier. The plaque was replaced with one honoring a local teacher who had spent 40 years educating children in the district. A better use of the wall space, if you ask me. The HOA attorney who had drafted the cease and desist letter was suspended by the Texas State Bar, pending a full investigation. Last I heard, he had voluntarily surrendered his license rather than face a public disciplinary hearing. He moved to another state and took a job selling insurance. Willowbrook Estates' HOA itself was placed under court supervision for 3 years. A new board was elected, made up of actual homeowners who had no connection to Jack Howard or his schemes. The development fund was dissolved, and every penny that could be recovered was returned to the people who had been defrauded. The 4 families in Phase 2 got to keep their homes. The deal I had offered them was finalized through Denise's office. Each family purchased their lot from me at the exact price they had originally paid to the HOA. No markup, no penalty for being victims of someone else's crime. They received clean titles, properly recorded with the county clerk, showing them as the rightful owners of their properties. One of them, a man named David Chen, who lived in the house closest to my farmhouse, invited me to a barbecue about a month after I moved back. All 4 families were there. Their kids played in the yard while the adults stood around a grill, drinking beer and talking about nothing in particular. At one point, David raised his bottle toward me and said something that made everyone laugh. "You know, Thomas, you would make a terrible HOA president. You actually care about people." I told him I would take that as a compliment. Old man Hector came to that barbecue, too. He sat in a lawn chair under a shade tree, watching everything with those sharp eyes of his. Someone asked him about his security cameras, and he launched into a 20-minute explanation of his entire surveillance setup. Motion sensors, night vision, cloud backup. By the end, 3 of the families had asked him for recommendations on systems for their own homes. He became something of an unofficial security consultant for the whole area after that. Every time a new family moved in anywhere nearby, Hector would show up at their door within a week, asking to see their deed and offering advice on camera placement. No one minded. After what had happened, people understood that vigilance was not paranoia. It was common sense. I still work offshore. The money is good, and I like the work. But now, when I leave, I know what I am coming back to. 47 acres of land that my grandfather bought with 2 decades of hard labor. A farmhouse that has stood for 60 years and will stand for 60 more. Neighbors who know my name and watch out for my property while I am gone. And a legal system that, despite all its flaws and frustrations, ultimately did what it was supposed to do. It protected the truth. It punished the guilty. It made things right. Jack Howard thought he could steal my land because I was not there to stop him. He thought paperwork and connections, and a fancy HOA title made him untouchable. He was wrong. The land does not forget who it belongs to, and neither do I. If you have watched this far, thank you for staying with this story. If you have ever dealt with an HOA that overstepped its bounds, a landlord who tried to cheat you, or anyone who used power to take what was not theirs, I hope this story gives you something, not a fantasy of revenge, but proof that the system, when you use it correctly, can work. Evidence beats anger, patience beats impulse, and the truth, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it, always finds its way back to the surface. This has been Fallout HOA. I will see you in the next one.